So I've been playing role-playing games for a few years now, and I've only just recently discovered solo RPGing. In other words, playing D&D by yourself. And it's certainly interesting. I think for one, it isn't something like you would think exists. It seems almost oxymoronic, because D&D often requires other people, it requires GM, it requires, but there's options for it. It's not something that's the most prideful to admit, because at least, especially with me, who uses Legos for combat maps, it's a bit silly feeling at times. But in this time of social distancing, or others where you may not have a chance to play as much D&D as you want to, it's always a nice option to just be able to, whenever you want, just pull out some dice and play some D&D. Now, before I tell you sort of how it works, I want to back up a little bit. So I'm a creative person, and whether it be through performance-based arts like acting, stand-up, or content creating, or more individual practices like creative writing, I love applying myself to these passions. Now, what I've found is that creative pursuits have varying degrees of gratification. The most instant gratification-based experience is something like visual art, which once it's made, you can enjoy and say, yes, I made that. But then there's something like writing, which takes sometimes over a year to make. You have to edit it, rewrites, and all that. Not to mention, it's not direct gratification. It's not like you have a crowd in front of you after you perform or make that creative piece. You have to just say, people liked your book, and they may not even start buying it at first. It's a very delayed gratification. So you can see there's this big scale when it comes to creativity, the kind of gratification you get from it. Not to saying that that should be your motivation for doing such things, but it exists. And as a people, it sounds like I'm doing a numbers game, but in truth, as a society, we like quicker gratification things unless we're really passionate about that thing. I mean, feeling productive has one of the highest dopamine levels that you can really do in normal, ordinary things, which is why people don't feel good when they don't feel productive. So it's just, people like things that have quick gratification, and unless you really enjoy dungeon mastering like I do, that's why there's not enough DMs, and even so, there's some DMs only put in maybe 2 hours of work before a session because of that gratification thing. How much more are you really gonna get for a greater amount of time? I love it because it allows you to be proud of the world you create, but also enjoy the players' interaction with it and have this joint storytelling with your players. And this leads into my next point. Our society has a lot of interactions through shared experiences. If we read the same book, played the same video game, watched the same show, we can talk about it together and enjoy that shared experience. Which means even if we're doing things alone, like reading a book or playing a video game, there's other people who do that same thing. Exactly. And we can talk about it with them. And those who don't have that shared experience have trouble to interact in that light. I found out this hard way when I don't succumb to the normal social norms, like having a social media presence. There are some things that I just don't get. And that's fine as long as you find other avenues to have it. And not to say that it's necessary, but for a lot of people, shared experiences are important in their interaction. This is why I find it so hard to explain how epic my last D&D session was to those who don't play it. They just don't get it. They weren't there, and it's not meaningful to them, even that there may be a TPK. But to us who lived and experienced those players and those deaths, it's meaningful. Now, as a kid, like many people, I played with Legos. Now think about it. You played it a lot, right? But how often do you remember actually the storylines that you created, if any? Not much, right? Now think about every time you met up with your friend and played Legos or something with them. I remember a lot of those. And these shared experiences allow us to keep talking about these old events even after they passed. And this is one of the failings of solo RPGing, because you don't have that shared experience. even with D&D being mainstream, it's often lesser, maybe even looked down upon, because those who don't partake in it, and basically every other human being in existence except the solo RPGer, doesn't understand that experience because it was only you. But just because we live in a world of shared experiences doesn't mean you can't have interactions that don't rely on them, or no one would ever talk about their vacations to other people. There are many self-gratification activities that we do that have a lot less value. Playing on their phones, online shopping, things that are a lot maybe less interesting time-wise than spending it doing a solo RPG. It certainly can feel silly, but that we're all weird. I like to sometimes record myself doing it because I'm more inclined to do voices when that happens. Also, if you want to see a great example of solo RPGing, I would check out Me, Myself, and Die. It's this voice actor named Trevor Duvall who runs it. He does everything by himself. He is solo RPGing, and it is very enjoyable. It is designed very well like a show, so they're pretty short, enjoyable, and he has great intuition of how to sort of derive these random stuff he's getting from the GM emulator and basically make that into an interesting and cohesive story that I was invested in. Seriously, check out, even if he runs a Savage World system, even if you don't play that, or solo RPG or anything else, it's a great story and can really show how, if you have intuition for these random generator stuff, how interesting the story you can create is. So, Me, Myself, and Die. I can't believe I have 15 subscribers. How can I endorse something? But anyways, I would check that out if you want to know more about it. It really gives a great example. Now, to understand what I'm talking about here, they basically use a GM emulator to simulate what the Dungeon Master does in your game. Because you don't want to know everything, because then you're not role-playing, you're just writing a story. Basically, whenever you have a question, you asked the GM emulator by rolling percentile dice. And based off of how likely that is to happen, for example, oh, is he lying to us? Well, that might be an insight check, but then you check to see if they're actually lying with the emulator, say. And then there's also a chaos factor, which allows you to kind of roll random events, which will interfere with your current story, as well as make things more likely or less likely, depending on how far or high the chaos factor is. What it almost feels like, there's this mystery and you're unraveling it. You're learning everything as you're doing this. You don't know how it plays out, but you're discovering it through dice rolls, which makes it really interesting. Now, you will have to kind of use elements from both being a GM and a player, because you kind of have to be able to make these things cohesive as a GM, and as a player, you have to play the game and roleplay. Well, you don't have to roleplay, but depending, you could just do a war games type thing where you just run combat. That works too. I tried running it in my own campaign setting, which may have been a mistake because I knew a bit too much about my own setting, but it still led to new interesting places, and I even created new stuff about my world that I even know existed beforehand because of the way things went. Also, it's really important to have something to draw from. Just like in one-on-one D&D, backstory is pretty important because that's going to draw from your entire character's motivations. Also, often, sort of how some emulators work is sometimes it'll bring in NPCs. So you want to have people from your backstory to draw in from, as well as just kind of having that backstory with NPCs to kind of fill your world with will help in the long run. There are other ways to experience D&D by yourself besides this solo RPGing. There's, I think, pre-written adventures you can use for solo RPG campaigns. Even like Choose Your Own style books that I think are pretty interesting, if done right. And even there's, like something that I created, like my Choose Your Own Adventure video where you can, roll dice and it'll take you different directions like that. It's more structured, but it doesn't require as much intensity as solo RPGing does. Now, time for my conclusion. I love Choose Your Own Adventures books as a kid. I loved being the protagonist of a story that I didn't know where it was going to go. And for me, being someone who likes to creatively write, I find myself having to take intervals because I'll start working on it, get really exciting, and every waking moment I'll think about the plot. And then I'll get far ahead, and then when I'm writing, I'm not living in the story. I'm just copying it down from memory, which isn't as fun for me. I like writing and developing it as I'm going along, which may be bad writing, but it's how I enjoy it and sort of create this thing as I'm going along, living in that experience. Solo RPGing allows me to tell a story that I don't know the end to. Read the Choose Your Own Adventure book. Roll the dice when you don't have to get 6 other people free. We're Spielbergs, renegades, Taliesin Jaffes, geeks. We're weird. And we're weird, so let's not pretend like we're cool. We're all a little odd, whether it be dancing by ourselves, clapping when a plane lands, mimicking motions of a fight scene while you're watching it on screen, or solo RPG. Let's embrace weirdness. But again, solo RPGs aren't for everyone. They're for the latchkey kids and hermit readers of the world. And if you're like me and have willingly parted company from your friends to explore on your own and talk to random strangers to have these interesting experiences, or being just as happy in social distancing as you are in normal life. And while nothing will ever replace the input of multiple people and collaboration that makes D&D what it is, solo RPGing may be worth trying out. And I say, to make it significant, not be something that happens by your own, just be as a fleeting moment. Make a blog about it. Chronologize your story. Write it down. Or even record yourself doing it. If you need evidence to make something meaningful, well, that solves your problem. This is Sean from Dodeca Dungeon, signing off.